You're listening to Thrive, where every week we have meaningful conversations with incredible women like you, packed with practical tips and sisterly advice to bring you from a life of simply surviving to thriving. We're shaking the story that you're just getting by and stepping into who God made you to be. Because it's not enough to simply survive, you deserve to thrive. I'm your host, Erica Gwynn, and I'm ready to thrive together. Here's today's episode. Hey friends, and welcome back to Thrive. Joined here with my new friend Becca, and we have pretty much the coolest connection to share with you here because if you follow along on Instagram or probably on the blog, you've probably seen me share Pamela's brownies. And Pamela's brownies are like shameless plug to our dear friend Pam. She makes the best brownies ever. She's got a heart of gold. She's probably listening to this episode right now. And we basically became connected because of Pam, because Pam knows Becca, now Becca knows me, and now Becca's here on Thrive to know all of you. So this is really fun and full circle. So thank you, Pam, for your brownies and for connecting us and bringing us Becca.
Yes, thank you, Pam, if you're listening.
I love this. So Becca, welcome to Thrive. I'm so
Thank
happy to
you.
have you. I feel like the
I'm
theme
so
song of
happy to be here.
Yeah. I feel like the theme song of this episode is gonna be that song from the Backstreet Boys where it's like, what makes you different, makes you beautiful. I was planning this episode and could not stop thinking of that song. So it's true, A, and it's also B, very timely and very relevant to everything that we're gonna talk about today and then some, I'm sure. So I know you have the most darling debut novel out called Road Trip Rescue, but the main character, I believe, right, was inspired by some of your own story, which is really cool. And I don't want to steal any of your thunder. So I'm going to just pass the mic over to you right away to say, tell us your story and how you came to create an entire kids book from it, because that is so stinking cool.
Yeah, thank you so much. So let's see where to even start. I am a mom. I'm also a writer, as you mentioned. I write books for kids ages 8 to 12 to help remind them that they are wonderfully created for the unique adventures that God has for them in their lives. And I've also been lots of other things before. I used to work as a newspaper reporter, and I used to work as a kindergarten teacher for several years. But I've always loved writing from the time honestly, before I could even write, I remember creating stories. And then once I was learning to write, I would just fill notebooks and notebooks full of these creative stories about islands made of candy and talking teddy bears and all sorts of fun things. And also, I was born missing half of my right arm. So I was born with a limb difference. And that was something that growing up, I felt a little bit different than those around me. There were a few times where other kids would say things that were unkind. And I don't think it was always intentional, but in the back of my mind, especially whenever I'd walk into a new space, a new crowd with people I didn't know, it was always kind of in my mind, like, are people staring at me? Are they wondering what happened to my arm? And then knowing how to address that, like when I'd first meet someone for the first time, because I'm thinking, well, I know what they're wondering. So do I bring it up right away? Do I wait for them to ask? Navigating all those sorts of questions. So loved to write, dealing with that. And then I never knew how all of these pieces would come together, that I would be able to write a story that put some of those experiences into it. So my debut novel, like you mentioned, is called Road Trip Rescue, and it released last October. It is about a girl named Kimmy. And like me, like you mentioned, she does have a limb difference. So she was also born missing part of her right arm. And honestly, the story is only in part about the limb difference. The biggest part of the story is she's going on a road trip to find her long lost dog. And so her arm does not define who she is. And that was important to me because, my arm isn't the most important thing about me, but her arm does factor into her story and it does influence the way she sees herself. And we get to see that it's part of her transformation through the story. And when I was younger, I never got to read books with characters with a limb difference. That was just something I never really saw. I remember when Bethany Hamilton, I don't know if that name rings a bell for you, but she was a surfer and she had lost her arm in a shark attack. I believe she was 13 years old. And she wrote a book, which was a true story, not fiction, but based on her experience. And I remember just really loving that getting to read her story and feeling so inspired by her. But other than that, there really wasn't a whole lot. And so to be able to write a book now that kids who do have a limb difference can see themselves in, and even looking at the cover that they can see themselves, and also kids who don't have a limb difference, but might have something else that's different, or might just feel like they don't quite fit in, that they can see themselves reflected, and that they can be reminded that their differences make them beautiful and that they are never alone.
I love that so much. Do you think, I mean, this is kind of like jumping in real deep right off the bat, I guess, but do you think that you thought of your limb difference differently or would have thought of it differently? The fact that you were born with it versus having something happen to you, like having an accident, like what happened with Bethany
Yes.
Hamilton.
Yes, I do think it makes a big difference on a lot of levels. So one, just from like a practical standpoint, because I was born with one arm, I learned how to do everything with one arm. And so it came very naturally to me. At school, I do a lot of school visits to talk to kids about what it's like to be an author and write books. And I get a lot of questions like, how do you tie your shoes with one hand? How do you do your hair with one hand? How do you change your daughter's diaper with one hand? I mean, any question you can think of, they probably asked it. Have you done it with one hand? And it's hard for me to answer those questions because it just comes so naturally to me. I've just adapted. And I do have my elbow on my right arm, so I can still use that arm to help me with things. But someone who lost their arm later in life, they've adapted to doing things with two arms. They've learned to do things with two arms. So they are having to change the way they do things, whereas I never had to change things. I learned how to do it a certain way. And I've said before, if I woke up one day with a right arm, I don't know what I'd do with it because I'm so used to doing things with one. When I was younger, I had prosthetic arms. And from the time I was a baby up until third grade, my parents would take me every summer to Shriners Hospital in Philadelphia, and I would get fitted for a new prosthetic. And for me, I didn't necessarily need them. And not that they weren't really cool and innovative, and it was cool to see the way technology was developing, but because I had learned to do things my own way, I just didn't really utilize a prosthetic. However, I can imagine that if you had lost a limb later in life, that could be just hugely beneficial to be able to do things that you were used to doing with two arms or with two legs or whatever that might be. And then from an emotional standpoint, it kind of, in similar ways, I was always used to being different and always used to people staring. Sometimes, especially younger kids, they don't know any better and they like to stare. And when I taught kindergarten, I learned pretty quickly that it's good right when I introduce myself to explain about my arm, answer any questions right off the bat. I was used to all of that. Whereas again, if that was something that came in later in life, I can imagine that it would be challenging. You would notice it more. It would seem different. It would be hard to adjust to. Kind of like when you're young, learning new languages can come a lot easier and you get used to things. If you're older and something happens, it can just be harder to adjust to, I think.
Yeah. Okay, well, you seem like you have such a wonderful perspective on all of this now and are like a ray of sunshine in human form. So, did you have a period when you were younger where maybe you had some resentment about it, or you were kind of upset about it, or like it did bother you? Or I know people don't love admitting this all the time, but maybe were you like mad at God at any point where you were like,
Mm.
dude, why did you only give me one arm here? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I can't think of any particular times where because of my arm, I was like mad about having one arm. And I'm sure there probably were times. I think sometimes our minds like block those things out. But what I remember more than that is sometimes feeling like, why do I have to be different? Or why do I have to stand out in this way? I often reflect on this one particular story. In gym class, we had this contest. It was like the Presidential Fitness Award or something, and you had to
Oh, I
do,
remember that.
yeah, it was pretty brutal. You had to
I
like
don't think they
run a
have kids
mile.
do that anymore. I feel like it was just our generation that did this.
Yeah, I haven't heard about it in recent years, so I kind of doubt it's still around. But you had to like run a mile in a certain amount of time and like
Yeah.
sprint, yeah, all this stuff. And the one thing was pull-ups. So you had to do a certain number of pull-ups on the pull-up bar. And of course, only having one hand, I couldn't use two hands to pull myself up. So I adjusted as I had been used to doing my whole life. And I used my right elbow. I hooked my right elbow over the bar and I used my hand and I did pull ups that way. Now, that means I was only pulling myself up like half the distance as everyone else. And I could do quite a few pull-ups that way because it wasn't quite as hard. And the other kids in class, I just remember, especially the boys, being really like mad about it. Like, that's not fair. Why can she do it that way? She really couldn't do that many if she was, you know, pulling herself up as much as we were. And I just remember thinking, like, what am I supposed to do? Like, I can't just do it with one arm. Some people can, but I certainly can't.
Yeah.
And so I remember just feeling like feeling everyone's eyes on me and just wishing like that I wouldn't stand out so much and that I could more slip away. And I was a pretty quiet as a kid at school, especially. And I think I would have liked to slip into the background a little more, especially during something like that. So I do remember feeling like why this? Why is this happening? I don't remember necessarily connecting it always to wishing I had like two arms, but definitely that like wishing that I was more the same as everyone else, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But I think it's also really cool though to see how full circle you took something and you wrote a book about it. Clearly that's using it for uh, using it for God's glory to show like, hey, you can be born different and want to slip into the background, but I'm going to create this awesome thing and make a project to be shared and to be spread to help other people and not just slip into the background. So how many people you have probably benefited from refusing to just slip into the background and by standing up and being like, hey, I have this thing that makes me different. And if it makes you different too, you're going to love this book and it's for you and it's all okay and it's awesome. And I think that's really cool that you leaned into it instead of allowing it to like be something that caused you to hide or feel any degree of shame whatsoever.
Thank you. I do think that it is so great when we can see how God puts these things in our lives that can be challenges at a time. And then he uses them that we can reflect his glory better. So the fact that like, yeah, as a kid, I never would have thought like, oh, one day this is going to help me reach out to more people, or it's going to help me have conversations that I never would be able to have otherwise. Like I have been able to talk about God to so many people because of my arm and because of conversations that it brings up. So that's super fun.
And what's cool about that too, though, is it's like we still have the choice. It's like he didn't give this to you and then also give you this path forward with the platform and the book and all of this. Like you could have gone the other direction where you leaned into having resentment about this or being bitter or
Mhm.
upset or turning it on God. Like, why did you make me? Why did you do this? Like, and feeling really negatively about this
Mhm.
and not using it for anything good for yourself, let alone for other people or for him. So I think it's really awesome. And when you kind of reflect on it from that lens too, how many times in life in general, all of us have something
Mhm.
that maybe makes us different in some way, or that some could see as a limit or a
Yeah.
handicap or something that could hold us
Mhm.
back in some capacity. And you very much could lean into that and be like, yeah, you're right. This is a limit. And like, that must mean I can't go on, or I must not be able to do XYZ because this is going to stop me. But instead, turning it around to like, actually, I think I can use this for something good and I'm going to make the best of it no matter what. And then doing absolutely that.
Yeah, even experiences too. I think that can kind of fall into the same area where we might have this experience or we might be going through something. We're like, why is this happening? And to kind of wallow in that and think like there's no good that could ever come of this. I remember, and I had mentioned before that I used to work as a newspaper reporter and a kindergarten teacher. And both of those obviously have become so helpful in my job now as a children's writer. But when I worked as a newspaper reporter, I was not happy about it. Like I was having a challenging experience. There were so many days where I was like, what am I doing here? Like, God, why why this place, why this job? And it was my first job out of college too, so just feeling that like needing some sort of purpose and needing to be doing something, wanting to be doing something for the kingdom of God, and feeling like, well, where is the good in this? Like, what is coming of this? um and so it's definitely, as I reflect back on experiences and my arm and all of it, I'm like, God puts everything, all these things in our lives for a reason, so we can trust that he sees the big picture, even when we don't know what's going on and we can't understand where he's leading us.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, what's really so beautiful is that we know we serve a God who is so intentional. Like, absolutely
Mm-hmm.
nothing is by accident in his plan.
Mm-hmm.
So, even what may feel very purposeless, very fruitless for us, very much has intention behind the scenes. And sometimes we just really have to lean into that to let the fruit grow and give it the time and give it the
Mhm.
seasons, which I feel like is such a hot buzzword anymore, but it's so true because it may
Yeah.
take seasons or it may take really painful or dry seasons where we really need to be patient and nurturing and just show up to do our part in faith, even when it
Mhm.
hurts or is confusing or is hard, because he can really make awesome fruit grow from that if we give him our yes and our obedience and our heart. And I think that's just so sweet to see. Do you have any like core memories now where you look back and you're like, okay, I could see why that happened to me, and I think now it's happening for me, and I think I see that, I see like the seeds being planted in those harder seasons.
That's such a good question. Honestly, to go back to the story I told about doing the pull-ups, I have told that story so many times in the past couple of months at school visits, and just reliving that in some ways is it's hard. It's like that was such an uncomfortable place to be in. But at the one school visit I was in, a student came up to me afterward, and he didn't have much time because his class was leaving, but he kind of came up and he's like, "Thank you for sharing this," or "Thank you for writing this book. I've always kind of felt different too." And I didn't get to talk to him long because then he turned and he ran to go to his class. But um, I got to think like those experiences where I did feel different or I did feel set apart or like people were staring at me, those now I can relate to kids on such a deeper level. And through my stories, I can put that perspective in a much deeper way. So I think that particular story definitely sticks out. And then going back to the newspaper and how that had been a challenging experience. One of my very first days of work there, and I should say there were good parts about being there too. It wasn't all terrible. But one of my first days, I was sent to a Walmart parking lot to randomly poll people in regards to a presidential election. And the
Great.
last thing that people
Wow.
want to do in a Walmart parking lot is talk about a
Talk
presidential
politics.
election.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it was just really unpleasant. It was raining. I think it was January or February, I think. So it was cold, it was raining. People didn't want to talk to me. I had this big camera around my neck. Who wants to get their picture taken by a reporter in a parking lot at Walmart? And so it was just I remember I was supposed to get like 5 to 10 maybe quotes from people and hopefully pictures. That was the assignment I was given by my editor. And I got like maybe two people talked to me, but they didn't want their pictures taken. So I had failed by like, I had failed the assignment and I could not like do it anymore. Like I just remember going up to people and the rejection was just like, I understand why you're saying no. I would probably say no too, but I couldn't take it anymore. And I went to my car and I just like was crying in the driver's seat. And I called he was my fiance at the time, my husband now. I called him just like crying, like, what am I doing here? Why am I working at this place? But now I look back on that and I see like that more than a lot of things I've ever done was putting myself out there in a really uncomfortable way. And so now in my job, I put myself out there in a lot of other ways. I do, podcast interviews like this one. I do YouTube videos. I go to school visits and stand up in front of hundreds of students. But all of that feels, if I compare it to that experience of going to the Walmart parking lot, I'm like, none of this is so bad. None of this is so scary. So that's kind of maybe a sillier example, but definitely one where I can see God putting me in a challenging situation that grew me and that I can feel the benefits from it now. Definitely not at the time, though.
Yeah. No, but it's true. That's exactly how it works, I think. We're in the moment, we don't necessarily think like, oh, yes, this is pruning me for down the road. In the moment, we're like, get me the heck out of here. This is so
Yeah.
uncomfortable. And I'd rather be anywhere but here in this Walmart parking lot talking to strangers about politics. Like, oh my gosh, ew. But like you said, yeah, now you can look back and you're like, there were skills. There were skills that were learned. There was even just a sense of like resilience or
Mm-hmm.
confidence or
Mm-hmm.
compassion for other people in terms of how you're showing up in conversation. Like there are so many little skills that you pick up along the way doing those uncomfortable things that just
Yeah.
end up going in your back pocket for down the road. And then all of a sudden you're like, in front of a group of people and you're like, wow, this feels really easy. Why does this feel so easy? And like you said, you're like, oh, because it absolutely beats what I had to do that many years ago.
Uh-huh.
And suddenly you don't even realize you're picking up these skills along the way, but you
Yeah.
do. And you're like, okay, I see how that was more. I wasn't, I felt like a victim in the moment, but like, I'm actually kind of glad that that happened and I have some
Mhm.
things to show for it.
Yeah, and even the idea that it's like okay to fail because I did have to go back and I had to tell my editor I couldn't get everything you wanted. But it was okay. You know, the world didn't come crashing to the ground. And I've always been a pretty
Yeah.
high achiever. And so the idea of failing was also really scary. And it's also scary, you know, to put a book out into the world and to wonder, are there readers? And right now, as we record this, I know it'll be done by the time the interview comes out, but I am pre-launching book 2 in the Road Trip Rescue series on Kickstarter. And it's a crowdfunding platform and it's very public. So you can see when someone pre-orders a book and you can see what they've pledged to help the project come to life. And it's scary. And there's a chance you'll fail in front of everyone. But and not that it's not scary and this doesn't make it less scary, but I've failed before. And I know that I can continue on if it does happen.
Yeah. I think what you just said is really important. Like it's still scary. It still stings.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that it's not going to still have fruit down the road. It's like there will still be, you'll still get like the occasional sour something in plucking where you're like, oh, that wasn't really as good as I hoped it would be. But like as a whole, it can still very much be a success. And everything you can use I think you can use everything for some part of the process along the way if you are willing to not have pride, I think, along the way, because a lot of us miss the opportunities that we could use because we don't want to we're like too concerned with how we look when we're showing up. Like we don't want to seem like a failure to other people or we're too it's pride. Like we're just too concerned with how people are perceiving us where we kind of shortchange ourselves because we shortchange ourselves
Yes.
of some of those opportunities that we could take and use for not just ourselves, but then also to help other people.
Yeah, I think it can be so hard to recognize it as pride at first too. Like it's easy to give it other names like, oh, I'm just worried about this, or it's something different than I've done before. When you get to the core of it and like realize, oh, this is pride. This is me like
This is
thinking
pride.
other people thinking about how they're thinking about me and wanting to present myself in a good light. So yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Yeah. I'm curious how, since we're talking like seasons and stuff too, how have you seen God show up for you in this season? And how does it feel or look maybe a little different from past seasons?
This season has been extra full and I try not to use the word busy too much. I think it's easy to say, like, oh, I'm so busy right now because
Yeah.
it's intentionally full. It's things that I want to
Yeah.
fill it with. My daughter is a little over a year old now. And so my days are filled with taking care of her and chasing her around the house and trying to make sure she doesn't drink from the dog's water dish, like those
Oh,
sorts
yeah.
of things.
Relatable.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I am writing and I'm trying to fit that into my day and marketing because that's also a big piece. And there's all these different business things that come together and balancing business stuff and family stuff. And it's easy to become overwhelmed and to feel like intimidated by everything that has to come where I'm like sitting down at the end of the day and like, oh my goodness, how am I ever going to check all these things off of my to-do list? How am I ever going to keep moving forward with the things that need to get done? And it's easy to feel like a sense of urgency. Like if these things don't get done, then this bad thing will happen, which isn't true. Like it's fine if things get pushed back a little. It's okay. It happens to everyone. So it's just been a very full season of life, but the goodness of God and the way I've seen him show up more than ever is just in this sense of like his closeness and his nearness and the expansion of love that we have gotten in growing our family. And it's just changed my perspective on work and on what needs to happen and to be able to like step back and just spend time with my daughter and be present. And I know that is a gift from God. That's not something that comes from myself. I'm very type A, very driven personality, very like check everything off my to-do list. And I still fall into that quite a bit. But when I like step back and like invite God into my daily life and into my writing and into my relationship with my daughter and my relationship with my husband and all of that, I can feel a lot more peace and can know that like this is a gift that this season of life, like just to be present and to know that he's here with us, and he's given me all these parts of my life that can make it feel very full. He's given them all for a purpose and all for a reason, and he's not going to like he's going to walk with me through it. And so I can just trust in him that the things that need to happen will happen, and if they don't, it's okay. He's still here.
Yeah, I love that. And it also just speaks to the fact that like he will use whatever we let him. So if you're
Yes.
able and willing to give him those certain parts of your everyday, it kind of is like, I think it could feel a little overwhelming or maybe not intimidating, but uh like I not isolating is probably also not the right word, but just like if you feel you look at something, maybe you look at something like a limb difference, and maybe someone listening who doesn't have a limb difference and feels very like typical in their
Mm-hmm.
everyday life. You know what I mean? Like doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
a big like something that happened to them or a big story or something. Maybe they don't feel like they stand out in some way for better or worse.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can feel like, well, what's God going to use me for? Like I'm just going through
Mm-hmm.
life here, going through the motions.
Uh-huh.
Like I almost feel like that's the flip side of it where
Yeah.
he will use what makes you different if you let him. He will also use anything that you give him if
Mm-hmm.
you let him. So it could be the thing that you think makes you different and stand out. It can also be just like the thing that you don't see right now as being special, quote, end quote, in any capacity. You feel like it's just, well, what's so great about this? Like everybody can do XYZ or whatever. And I think that that's just not true. And that's just like a trap we fall into. And like you said, every single element of your day he can use for something if you let him.
Yes, I love that. I talk a lot about like if I'm talking to other writers, the biggest advice I love to give is to invite others into your creative process and to invite God into your creative process. And so I love what
Yeah.
you're saying about inviting God into all aspects of our life and to things that might feel different and to things that feel maybe really ordinary to us and very mundane
Yeah.
and very everyday. Inviting him into all of those moments is really beautiful.
Yeah. What do you think are some standout things that maybe parents can do for their kiddos to really honor and celebrate what does make them unique? Especially as you are seeing, I feel like you have such that a really cool insider perspective, like having been in a classroom teaching, but then also be visiting schools so much. Like you have access to so many kids and seeing what they're going through and talking to them in that way. So what do you think would help what do parents need to know? Like, what's like the need to know thing? Like, if you want to really honor and celebrate your kiddo's uniqueness, do this.
So, my first thing I would say, and I'm a little bit biased as a writer and a reader, but to be allowing your kids to enjoy lots of books with lots of different characters so they can read about different experiences. So, if your child is different in some way, having them be able to read a book with a character who shares that difference. And there are so many great books now with characters that are diverse in a lot of ways that might struggle with different things. So I think that can help. But even if your child doesn't struggle with that particular thing or have a certain difference, to be able to read a lot of different books can be such a great builder of empathy. Because when you're reading a book, you are getting to see the world through the eyes of a character, a fictional character, but still a character who might have a similar experience to, and probably does, to someone from real life. So being able to see how someone else sees the world, put yourself in someone else's shoes, is a great way to just expand empathy. And another thing, so this is specifically if any parents are listening who have a child with a limb difference, there is a community called Lucky Fin Project. They are on Instagram. I think they're probably like they have a website and stuff too, but they are a really great resource for families with children with a limb difference because I know it can be overwhelming for a parent if you find out you're maybe having a child with a limb difference, or if you have a child with a limb difference and just aren't sure how to best be there for them. That can be a great place to go and like a community to ask questions, and to also create opportunities for your child to be around other children who are like them. So growing up, I had mentioned that I went to Shriners Hospital, and there was like some sort, and I can't remember like specific details because it was a long time ago, but there was some sort of camp that my mom had taken me to with other kids with limb differences. And so for me to get to be around a lot of other kids who were like me made me feel less alone, made me feel like I wasn't, the only one like me. So that was really special. And so whatever difference your child might have, to be able to be around kids who are like them. And then even if your child, yeah, is like you had mentioned, like maybe doesn't have something that makes them feel special or different, to encourage them in the talents that you see that God has given them, things that do make them special and unique, because we all have those things, but then also to expose them to a lot of differences around them, I think is important.
I love that. Going off of that too, what do you think if there are kids who are kind of like in that space of wondering what does make me special or unique and are
Mm.
feeling like they're kind of looking to find that, what would you recommend for them or for their parents too, and kind of helping them, find that special something that sparks them where they're like, oh, okay, like I like this about me.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times it can come in like hobby form. Like, what is something that you
Yeah.
really enjoy doing? What is something you find immense joy in? And those things they can feel kind of ordinary. Sometimes you're like, well, I like to draw, but lots of people like to draw. But to really lean into that and be like, well, actually, like, it's not just drawing. Like, God has given me this immense joy in being able to draw a picture, and I can foster that. I can spend time doing that, and I can really create alongside my creator. Like, I have been created to create by the creator, um, and leaning into that. So I think exploring different hobbies, seeing what interests you, seeing what gets your attention. And again, that can come through reading books too. Like, what are some interesting things this character might like to do, or some fun things you might like to try? So I remember in school, I can't remember what grade this was. We had an assignment for a class, and the teacher had challenged us to all try something we'd never done before. And I could not think of anything to do, but then I ended up playing tennis. My mom and I went to a tennis court and we played tennis, and I really enjoyed it. And I mean, it wasn't like a passion that I stuck with and like still play tennis a whole lot now, but just yeah, doing new things with your kids, helping to foster things that they already enjoy, and be I think, as always, like leaning into prayer, to like asking God, like, how can I best support my child, and how can um what sorts of conversations could I have with them that might open up opportunities to help them see that they are wonderfully created.
I love that. I love it so much. Okay, no spoilers, but Road Trip Rescue has a sequel, book two,
Yes,
Road
yes,
Trip Return, right? Coming
yes.
soon. Is this coming? Like, can you tell us a date of when this is
Yes,
dropping?
I can. Yes. So Road Trip Return, and the series is interesting in the fact there'll be three books, but they are all written from a different character's perspective. So book one is from
Ooh,
Kimmy's
love that.
perspective, and book two is from Daniel's perspective. And so they don't they're different types of stories, but they are best read in order because the characters overlap. So Kimmy, for those who loved Kimmy from book one, she's still in book two. Book two is Daniel's story, and he's a friend that Kimmy meets about halfway through book one. And he has some things that make him a little different too. And one thing that's unique to him is he has lived with just his big brother his entire life. And his family's actually from Guatemala, and his father had left when he was just a baby. So his big brother has raised him. It's been just the two of them his entire life, and that's the way he likes it. And then at the beginning of book two, and without saying too much about what happens in book one, at the beginning of book two, his big brother's getting married, and just a week before the wedding, his brother's fiance disappears. And Daniel is like wondering, this is not good. Like, if she would do this to him now, what's their marriage going to be like? Is this like a bad thing for our family? And he's worried about change anyway. And then they find out she's gone to Guatemala. And that is the last place that Daniel wants to hear that she went, because to him, this is a major red flag. And so he decides that maybe he should try to sabotage the search for her so the wedding doesn't have to happen at all. So that's book two. So very different than book one, but characters still overlap, has a lot of the same themes. It's funny, we talked a lot about how God sees the big picture and God uses different things from our lives that come up later. We just don't see it at the
Yeah.
time. And that is a big part of Daniel's story, is learning to trust that God does see the big picture, even that when we don't understand what's happening and we might be afraid of changes that are coming. But book two is will be launching in September. So I think it's September 4th. Yeah, September 4th is the date that book two will be available.
Amazing. Okay, I know they're meant for like 8 to 12-year-olds, but I'm sitting here like, ooh, that sounds like a really good story. I want to know what happens. So you need like the adult counterpart. It
Yeah.
sounds like it's like a thriller for kids, which I love.
Well, it's fun because whenever I'm like out talking about the books, I'm like, well, they're technically written for kids ages 8 to 12. However, lots of kids who are younger have enjoyed them as like family read alouds, like families will read them together. And they, my first book had discussion questions in the back of it. And that's something that I'm hoping to include in book two as well. We're doing the Kickstarter campaign right now, and that's one of our like stretch goals if we reach a certain level of funding. But through those discussion questions, I know families are able to have some deeper conversations. And then I also have had readers that are much older than 12 who have given me really great feedback, and they've loved not only the story but how it's like taken them back to those age, like to that age in their lives, because those ages, like that 8 to 12 year age range, and I mean, I write for that age range for because I think it is such a transformational and important part of your life. Like when I think back to the books that I've read that have really stuck with me, it's the books that I read when I was that age. So I'm really thankful that God has allowed me to write for that age group.
It's such a full circle calling on your life. And it just feels really cool to get to like see all of this and talk to you about it because it's like, wow, that is such an awesome, that's just so cool. I just love how God does that. Like it's just such a cool
Yes.
for full circle thing. And I think it's just really, really incredible that you said yes and you just leaned in and you're doing the dang thing. It's awesome.
Thank you, Erica.
I love that. Okay, Becca, in wrapping things up, I'm asking you what we ask everybody to close the show. Super fun question here. It's what does thrive mean to you, and how do you strive to thrive in your everyday life?
I love this question, and I have kind of like two answers. I couldn't decide
Cool.
which
Give it to
one.
us. Give it to us.
So the first one would be just living out of gratitude. And that's something that I'm constantly striving toward. And I don't always do it well, but I think that when we can like live from a place of gratitude, it gets rid of it's like a natural enemy to so many other things we might struggle with, like pride, like selfishness, like fear. So I think that just trying to turn to gratitude when those things creep in, as like being a new parent, it's been over a year now, but still like there are feelings of anxiety and like, am I doing this right? Am I messing this up? And with the book too, like, you know, we talked about this a little, like, are there going to be readers for book two? Is this, are people going to connect with this story as much as book one? All of those questions and anxieties and fears that can come up, they stop us from being able to thrive. And when we can be grateful and instead be like, I'm so thankful that God has trusted me to love my daughter and to care for her. I am so grateful that God has given me this calling to be able to write these stories. And if even one reader is able to read the story and it makes a difference in their lives, like that is amazing. And I am so thankful. So that's one. And the second one, I think, is just creating and finding so much joy in creating. I think that part of being created in the image of God is that we are created to create as well. And so that looks a lot of different ways for a lot of us. Like you create these amazing podcasts that people can listen to and they can learn from, and creating books, and people create art. And I mean, the list goes on, video games, apps, all of these things. Um, I think that being able to create in a world that has taught us to be constant consumers is really beautiful. And if we strive to create more, I think we can find a lot of joy in that.
I love that so much. On that note, Becca, tell everybody where they can find you online to connect with you more.
My website is beccawierwille.com. Wierwille is Wierwille. And I know that's a mouthful. So you can also find me at belovedchronicles.com. That'll take you to my website as well. And there, the best way to connect with me is to sign up for my email list. And as soon as you get to my website, you'll see a place for that. But I'll send some free short stories and other resources, especially if you have young readers in your life. And then also I'm on social media and YouTube at Becca Wierwille.
Wait, before you go, make sure you're subscribed to never miss an episode of Thrive. Drop 5 stars on your way out if you like what you just listened to, and come join the party on Instagram at thrive.podcast to stay inspired and thriving all week long. Thanks for tuning in. It's your time to thrive.